What is up, Whale family, and welcome to Blockchain Beats, where we explore the pioneering artists taking audio and music to the next level of emerging tech and interactivity with NFTs. Our special guest today is composer and performer Cristina Spinei, who has long earned accolades for her progressive style fusing operatic melody with dance-inspired rhythmic movement and vitality. With her creative endeavors in NFTs, Cristina continues to forge new pathways as a torchbearer for classical musicians in the world of Web3. Cristina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really honored to be here.
Super hyped to talk to you. Just to level set everyone, for people in the audience that may not be familiar with you or your music, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a classically trained composer and pianist. I went to conservatory and, had my whole musical education steeped in the classical world. And when I graduated from college, I started writing music for ballet companies. So dance is something that is really important to me and kind of served as a foundation for how I see music, how I hear music. So I've been writing for like over 20 dance companies, I think, in the past, 10 years.
That's all?
Well, no, maybe it's longer. When did I graduate? No, a while. We won't say the exact date. But so yeah, I've mixed my work with dance, also just orchestral music, just pure instrumental music. And over the past few years, like over the past 5 years, I really started to get into writing my own music for me as a pianist, which is something that I hadn't done. So I've really enjoyed that aspect of creating music, just writing for myself as a pianist and releasing my own music for solo piano, and kind of now trying to mix that in with synthesizer and more electronic things. So yeah, it's always a progression. I like being able to learn new things and add more layers on top of the music that I've already done.
Very cool. I was reading a little bit about your background. So I see that, you grew up in Stanford, in Connecticut. I'm in Boston, so not too far, although I would say that culturally Stanford is a lot more akin to New York City than it is Boston. There's a little bit of a divergence here in the Northeast, but obviously very rich culturally with what you would have there for, the arts around you. Piano lessons at a young age, right? Like 9 years old or so. And then even I saw that you had spent some time as a teen working in the offices of some of the symphonies and things like that around you. So a lot of exposure really early on.
Yeah, I was really lucky to grow up in Stanford. They have a great arts community. The conductor of the local Stanford Symphony Orchestra, Roger Nirenberg, kind of just took me under his wing and mentored me. And I would go to orchestra rehearsals, and I'd like get out of school, which I loved, skipping class to be able to go and sit in on orchestral rehearsals. So I had that right there in Stanford, and then New York City is only 45 minutes away on the train. It's really close. And I was like in New York every weekend when I was in high school, taking lessons at Juilliard pre-college program, and then taking conducting lessons on Sundays as part of the New York Youth Symphony. My grandparents lived in the Bronx, so I kind of had like that stepping stone of being able to stay in the Bronx and go down to Manhattan. And yeah, I was really lucky to grow up where I did and to have such a supportive community too.
Shout out to the BX. I have family down in Queens, so the boroughs are close to my heart, even though I am in Boston. So since then, you've relocated to Nashville, kind of set up shop there. You've been very active locally as well as, I guess, around the country and worldwide, if you consider what you've been doing in Web3 and NFTs, writing for orchestras, ballets, all kinds of projects, and really carrying with you kind of this unique perspective that you take, kind of amalgamating your love of different influences that you had in a unique way. And I'd love to get into that in just a moment. But just to ground everyone on kind of the stuff stuff that you do, I'd love to play relics that you have on glass, just to give everybody kind of a peek under the tent of what we'll be talking about. As I cue this up, anything you want to tell us about this particular track?
This was the first track that I wrote as part of my album Ex Voto. It was the one that got me thinking that there was more that I wanted to say around this music and the style of music. So it was kind of the catalyst for this whole entire album.
Awesome. Let's take a listen to Relics, and then we'll be right back with the conversation. Beautiful.
Thank you.
uh, really, really moving stuff, and it's so emotive. But I don't want to put words into your mouth. How would you characterize your music and sound?
It's reflective. I guess it depends what it is. Like my own solo piano music is very reflective, and I kind of want to give people a space where they can go and just be alone with their thoughts and kind of chill out a little bit and relax. My music for dance though is completely different because it's often for like chamber ensemble, chamber orchestra, percussion, piano. So it's a lot more grooving and movement based. But I like being able to have both separate projects where I get to just kind of write something calm and kind of like delve into these patterns that I like composing with. And I also like the feeling of being able to write some really rhythmic and percussive grooving music too.
Yeah, a lot of melody, a lot of movement and loops that you play with, and I've read somewhere that you really had a love for Latin dance music, and that is part of what carried over into the way that you compose. Can you talk about that for a little bit for us?
Yeah, my favorite music in the world is Latin music. I know it's a huge genre to encompass, but it is. Growing up in Stanford, like the radio that I would listen to, we had three really good Latin stations because I guess they came from New York. So I don't know much like pop music from the 90s, 2000s because the only thing I would listen to was classical and Latin. And my dad grew up in the city. He grew up in Hamilton Heights and like in a Puerto Rican neighborhood. And so he knows like all of these great musicians and introduced me to this wonderful music. And then when I was in college, I used to go to the Copacabana every Tuesday night because they had a free buffet. You got in early. And like for a college student, that's the most amazing thing, right? You get to dance and you get free dinner.
Of
So every
course.
Tuesday, yeah, I was at the Copacabana and I saw like Willie Colon, I saw El Gran Combo, like so many amazing, amazing musicians. I really got to know their music and see it up close and personal. So I think being involved in that scene, like dancing to that music, seeing it performed live, it just kind of gets into your subconscious and just kind of like gets into who you are and how you express yourself in your own music. Yeah, those were fun days. I miss that being in Nashville. We don't have as big of a Latin music scene, and it's little. It's growing, but yeah, it was great experiences.
I would have to assume, and I'm going out on a limb here, but family in the BX, New York, this time period, you had to have heard some Latin freestyle. I know you're not into pop music, but that had to have been on the radar at least a little bit. At least, for my music, I'll imagine that it was, and I wasn't the only one that was geeking out to that at that point in time.
Not so much. I mean, it was like Tego
Man.
Calderon and Aventura, and yeah, and that.
Well, you know what? Whatever the recipe was, it obviously had fantastic results, and we're glad that we didn't mess with it. You also described your music as minimalish. You talk to me about that.
Yeah. So it was a play on the word minimalist, which I didn't invent it. I was recording in Finland, in Mikkeli, Finland, which is actually closer to Russia than it is to Helsinki. It's a tiny town, beautiful. We were doing a an album of string orchestra music, and the conductor Jose Cerebriere invited me to have a piece uh, recorded by the Mikkeli Strings. And so the Finnish people are really well known for their like dry sense of humor. And I was in the cab going back to the airport with one of the violinists, and he said, "You know, Christina, your music, I don't like minimalism. I think it's annoying, but I think let's call your music minimalish." And ever since he said that, I'm like, oh, that's great. I'm going to take it because I do love minimalist music. I didn't get to it until later when I started writing for dance. I had never really listened to much of it until I was like the last year in college, which is weird because most people know about it before then. Um, so I started listening to like Steve Reich and John Adams, like second year of masters. But I don't think my music is fully minimalist because I love melody so much. I think there's like a beginning and an end to a phrase, and maybe with some more minimalist music, it kind of repeats for longer than mine does. I mean, it's generalizations, but I have the flavor of minimalist music, but I think there's still more driven by melody than traditional minimalist, maybe.
Makes sense. I may actually coin that. I may actually cop that phrase and use it around here and see if I can pull it off. Obviously, you have an eloquent reason to do so. They'll just think I'm trying to be cool. That being said, you touched on some influences. What are some major influences? Beyond which we've already touched on. I've seen you allude to movement, to color, to your heritage, to your faith. Were there other things that you really helped create this formative foundation of how you like to create and what comes out in your music?
I really loved jazz for a long period, and I did some internships, like a little work for Wynton Marsalis, and we were always trying to figure out how to get strings to groove, like how to get them to really syncopate and move. He was working on some orchestral music, I think the American Symphony, and he had me researching fiddle music and early American music. And then he said something really interesting, like strings never groove so much as when they play Bach and Baroque music. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I never thought of it that way. So I kind of did some deep dive into like Baroque music and how you can really hear this rhythmic movement in the strings that I had been trying to create, but I was going about it in the wrong way. I was trying to go about it by writing the super syncopated music that maybe wasn't so idiomatic to the instruments. And if I thought of movement more like Baroque composers did, that the players would be used to playing in that style. So it would have the rhythm and the syncopation that I wanted, but just kind of in a different way. So yeah, Baroque music, I love Vivaldi. I really do. I love the catchy hooks and the movement of his music. And I love jazz as well.
Very cool, very interesting. And relative to you composing and your composition, I love to play another piece for people. Just to, we saw you actually playing piano. I love to play a piece that you composed as well. One that interests me in particular was Prelude, which, from my understanding, was you really advocating for NFTs to, the orchestra and saying, hey, this is an opportunity in a lot of ways, right? It represents the technological evolution of music, of society, and we want to be part of it. But also, COVID was, had peaked. I don't want to say peaked, but obviously had become something of a big issue. Live performances at the time, I would imagine, were challenging, right? So another opportunity to do a lot of things, connect with audiences, provide different opportunities for the musicians. Talk to me about the creation of this.
Right. So it was during the time when orchestra seasons were shut down, basically. And a lot of orchestras were turning to streaming concerts. It took them a while to get on board, and there was still some pushback from musicians about streaming concerts, but that's a whole other thing. So the orchestra here in town, not the Nashville Symphony, but the Gateway Chamber Orchestra, is really wonderful at supporting local composers and just great about being involved in the community. And so the conductor, Greg Walenek, is a friend of mine, and he had written me an email, like sending me, I don't know, I think it was a happy birthday email, and I responded. I'm like, hey, I have this idea. I've been thinking about it for a while. What if we were the first people to put a new composition for orchestra on the blockchain? Would you guys be interested in something like this? And he's like, wait, back up. Explain to me, I've heard about NFTs. He was knowledgeable about them, but I had to explain a few things. And he actually had a streaming session set up already. They were doing this Haydn festival. So the orchestra was already going to be recording, having a live video. And he's like, we have this set up in May. This was the end of March. So if you can write an orchestral piece in this time frame, I think it was 6 weeks, we'll record it. And the orchestra is totally on board with us releasing an NFT. And he explained it to the orchestra. And I guess it's tradition for orchestras, instead of like clapping when they like something because they're holding instruments, they like shuffle their feet. So when he explained this idea to the orchestra, everyone was shuffling their feet, and they were enthusiastic about trying something new. So I was able to write Prelude in a few weeks and give them all the parts. And we had one rehearsal 1.5. I think we had 2 rehearsals actually before it was recorded. And I think they did a really beautiful job of playing the piece, and they were on board with kind of the ethos of what we were trying to do, which was find a new way for orchestral musicians to get royalties from the sale of their work, from their recording work. Because oftentimes when a musician plays in a session, they don't see residuals from that session. They get paid for the session, obviously. But if that album goes on to sell tons of copies, they see like pennies or fractions of pennies. So we thought this would be an interesting way to kind of shift that and be able to help the musicians out more. I think the Dallas Symphony Orchestra also released some NFTs on Rarible. And I think there's a lot of room for orchestras to experiment with this and to maybe even find new ways to commission composers this way too. They've had a hard 2 years, so I think there's a big future in NFTs and Web3 for orchestral music. It's just a chore to try to convince them that it's worth trying.
Yeah, I love that. Let's take a listen to this and we'll circle back and talk more about the reaction to you bringing NFTs to classical music. Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Moving stuff.
We're back.
We are moving stuff. You alluded to right there that there was a little bit of resistance, and that was something that I wanted to ask you about. Coming from a genre that's, very traditional, what was the reaction when you discussed the possibility of doing things with NFTs?
With this orchestra, with Gateway, it was great. It was just like they wanted to know everything about it. They wanted to know what it was, why I was doing it. And when I explained it, they were on board and they were like, yeah, why not try this? There's no downside. Why not? They already had a streaming session in place. Like, there's absolutely no downside of trying this technology, of trying something new. But in general, the classical music world isn't so much on board. I think they read these crazy headlines in like the New York Times and the New Yorker maybe, and they think it's a scam. And I mean, more and more classical musicians are on board, but the environmental thing really gets to them, and it's hard to try to convince them otherwise.
Yeah, and I've heard that from other people that have been in this genre or adjacent that they had similar pushback. But I think, people are coming around to understanding that this is something that's a progression of technology and just something that will be ubiquitous in the world, not really, this kind of side hustle, so to speak, right? I mean, they're associating it with just money and things of that nature. So I think, there's a lot of growth to be had, but people are coming around.
I hope so. Yeah, I really hope that they see examples in the space. Like, I have a few friends who are releasing classical music NFTs on async and on different platforms. So I feel like the more of us just go ahead and put work out there and are good examples of what's possible, I think the more people will be on board. I fully expect it to be a slow process because I feel like everything in the classical music world is slow. So it'll get there eventually.
Right. So, with regards to that, talk to me a little bit about your exposure and journey with crypto and NFTs.
Yeah, it started out completely, just randomly. My husband released something on Rarible back in the summer of 2020, and he's not a professional artist. He was just, doing some graphic design kind of on a whim and put it up on Rarible, and he told me the next day that he sold it. I'm like, what is this? I have no idea what Rarible is. So I started just looking into all of the different artists on Rarible, and I discovered Super Rare and Nifty Gateway at the time, I think. Yeah, those were the three platforms. I'm like, this is the most amazing thing to have an open marketplace where artists can release their work. There's no middleman. There's actually an audience of people who appreciate art, who want to see it and consume it and collect it. So I just went full down the rabbit hole of researching different artists. And I've always loved visual art. And so I started to notice different people's styles. Like, I got really excited when I can tell that Hackatao was a Hackatao, or, different things. I would start to recognize artists. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing. I really want to put my music on here. But I wasn't sure how, because there weren't too many examples of musicians back in those days. I found Studio Nouveau was the first musician who I found on Super Rare. And he does these incredible audiovisual pieces, every style, like classical, jazz, electronic. He does every kind of genre. So he was like the first example of what is possible for music in the Web3 space. And then I think around the same time, RAC released an album, or Blau, or maybe both of them, like did some EP album kind of drop. And I thought, this is amazing. I need to figure out how to do this. So I started reaching out to visual artists and asking them if they wanted to partner with me and create an audio-visual piece. I'm not a visual artist at all, like not at all. I wish I were talented in that way, but I cannot do my own visuals. So I thought, let me team up with some artists and we'll create this collaboration. I love working with other people. I love working with choreographers, with visual artists, because it just brings out a different dimension of my music that I wouldn't have thought of, I think, to begin with. So I reached out to Vans Design, who I think is actually, you guys have him in the vault. Yeah, for this digital soundscape. And this was the first piece that I released, and it's on Super Rare. And actually, funny enough, Studio Nouveau collected it. And I sent Vans like 3 different piano loops, and had him, choose which one he liked. And then I kind of massaged it from there and changed it around. And I love his art. I love it so holographic, and just so meditative, and I could just stare at it for hours. So yeah, this was the first collaboration that I did in the Web3 space.
Very cool. I would venture to say that you're tech inclined even prior to exposure, right? I read about, your founding here of Blind Ear Music, and looking into different ways to kind of leverage technology with music.
Yeah, wow, you really went deep on it. Yeah, this is from 2008. So thinking back now, I'm like, we were doing generative music before I even knew what generative music was. This I formed my last year of college with my business partner, Jakub Czapinski, and he wrote a software for us that made it possible for us to send loops that we pre-composed to musicians in real time. So we didn't even have it on, I mean, no one had an iPad back then. I don't know. It was really clunky. It was all on laptops. So the musicians all had laptops. We had to have these laptop stands. It was a setup. And what we would do was send these loops to musicians. Like, they didn't know what music they were going to get, but because it was only 4 measures long, it was really easy for them to sight read this music, and every musician had a click in their ear. So they knew the tempo, and you could actually see on the screen where the music was, where you were playing. There was like this red line that kind of kept track of where the musician would have been. And the cool thing about it is every musician's tempo was independent. So we could like have everybody start out playing the same exact thing. And little by little, we could desync them by like a 16th note, a 32nd note, whatever it was. And it was easy for them to perform because they all had a click that they were listening to. So we were able to create some really cool like stereophonic effects, some things that would be really, yeah, there's that little red line. Some things that would be hard for them to get together in rehearsal were easier because they were just focused on their parts, on their loop. And I mean, we got pushback for this too.
Right.
In the classical music world, which I mean, it's fun at this point, whatever. We were actually almost run out of a music festival in Maine when we brought it there over the summer. Yeah, it was fun to experiment, and I learned a lot about how different loops could interact with each other, and you know, the ability for things to desync, and how long music can last before something needs to change. It was a really great experiment, and we kind of were in residence at the Gershwin Hotel in New York. Nicky Carson, who's a photographer, and he was kind of part of the Warhol team. He was the curator there, and he kind of just let us do whatever we wanted. We could just set up a concert and experiment, and it was fun. It was really fun to experiment with this. But what ended up happening is our music that we put out there, we never could do the same thing again. So it kind of, in a way, was me experimenting with generative music without really knowing it.
Very cool, and makes sense to see your progression to here. I would assume that, you know, that wasn't on a whim, that you've had curiosity or been involved with tech at some point, whether it's computers or coding or whatever, that would make you think in that way, right? And those types of experimental means. But even just looking at your NFTs that you've brought to market, there's a lot of variance in there. Talk me through. So you did this. You dropped this with Vans, right? And then also, I don't know where Prelude comes in there, but it seems roughly around the same, you know, time frame.
Prelude was in May of 2021. So this was like the tail end of 2020.
Okay.
And at the same time, I had been talking to Martyrium about doing the work with him. His work is so beautiful. I don't know how he creates fabric and makes it like come to life and so detailed like this. So at the same time that I released with Vans, I was talking to Martyrium about doing this triptych. And I had just been accepted to Known Origin. That was another hard thing as a composer, like as a musician, knowing which platforms would accept me or not. I think I had applied to Super Rare in the fall of 2020, but I didn't really know what to tell them. Like, I'm a musician and I'll work with other artists. I don't know, it was a little awkward back then because there weren't music NFT platforms. And then I started releasing on Mint songs later on when they came about, maybe in March 2021, maybe. But, you know, I was planning projects and they would take a while to release. So it's a little bit all mixed up. But I have tried on a bunch of different platforms and even on my own over here. Yeah.
Right. So this, you know, when I saw this really sent me down the rabbit hole. Essentially, you were taking music. I don't know if I could do this justice, but you were experimenting with creating something that it has a visual component, but really within the music, there's clues to a puzzle that people can solve. And then collectively, if they do, they get the grand prize from this, you know, from this grand experiment.
Yeah. Yeah, I really wanted to hide a phrase in music, in musical notation, and see if people could solve it. There's a tradition of composers like hiding messages in music. I mean, it's really nerdy stuff, but I love it. Like Bach, B-A-C-H, can spell his name in music, and composers have been playing with this for a long time and hiding different clues. The story that I thought was hilarious. So I started going down this rabbit hole of researching who has hidden messages in music. And the best thing that I found was in the 1940s, a police was, or a detective was staking out this gambling ring, or what he thought was a gambling ring. And he was observing this guy all day. Different people were coming in, and he kept writing things down. And toward the end of the day, he goes to arrest the guy, but instead of seeing the ledger of bets, which he was expecting to see, he had like 4 pages of sheet music. He looks at this and he couldn't arrest the guy for like all the sheet music that he had. So he had to let him go. And he brought this sheet music to one of the lawyers that worked like in a different department because he knew that he was a cryptographer and also was a musician. And he gave him this sheet music. And he's like, I know these are bets. I think these are bets. Like, I'm sure people weren't giving this guy money to like write a symphony. So what does this mean? Like, how can we know that this music actually stands for something else? So this cryptographer played the music on the piano. He was like, no, this can't be right. This doesn't sound like anything good, and it's hard to play. It just doesn't make sense. And he realized after a few days that there were only 10 notes that were used, and each one of those notes stood for a number. And where the bar line was the end of the bet, and like where the other measure started with somebody else's bet. So this person was actually writing down bets and taking bets, but he was using notes to do it. And like if that lawyer didn't know music, he would have gotten off because it just looks like a piece of music paper.
Right.
So I thought that was really cool, and there are a lot of other examples of people hiding messages in music. So I thought I can definitely do this and release this as a musical puzzle. So I composed 3 pieces, and they're in 3 different keys, and they're all hiding the same messages across all 3. So you can get all 3 clues. Each one of them has 3 different clues as to what the hidden message could be. So if you collect all 3, you have like 9 clues, and nobody has won yet. I think I've gotten a few wrong guesses. You could actually guess right on the site. And I started, answering people's questions on Twitter, and people have reached out to me about different things. And yeah, no one solved it yet. I think maybe I made it a little too difficult. I don't know, but I
That's
don't mind if it takes a long time for people to
yeah,
solve it.
I love this, and I'd love to talk to you about async in just a moment because that's another interesting way to go about music on the blockchain. But between your progression of what you've brought and try to present as audio NFTs, and then the different things that you've experimented with, both reaching out with audio, to visual artists and combining your music with theirs, to doing experiments with, gamification with the puzzles, to, async, which is using the smart contract and layering and recomposition of stuff. You're in the weeds. You're in the weeds, Cristina. This isn't someone that's like, hey, I make music, let me slap it on the blockchain and monetize it. This is someone who's invested in the culture and the tech, and really trying to be progressive, much like they described your music in the way that you bring dance and movement to much of the the genres that you touch, both in composition and in your own works. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge and appreciate that, because it's definitely powerful stuff, and it's unique in this space.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm deep in it. I mean, when I believe in something and when I want to accomplish something, I go all in. So, I mean, I love this. I feel like this is what I've been waiting for my whole career in a way, and I'm finally getting to see it realized and these possibilities realized. So
So before we move any further, I know there's been some people that have been tuning in here at Whale. We've kind of stepped up our lean into Web3 and into the Omniverse by taking a lot of these Web3 assets, tokens, and having the interoperability of them mean something. So, with that, we've been issuing POAPs for all of our events, proof of attendance protocol. Our POAPs are going to accumulate and unlock different things that we have as an organization here at Whale members, both digitally and physically in the Omniverse, a lot of different things to come. But that being said, people are looking to accumulate these by tuning in and learning about these incredible creatives that we're interviewing and things that we're highlighting. So we do have one for today. I would advise anyone that would like to collect it to open the POAP app on their phone. You can download it from the App Store if you don't have it, but we issue ours via secret phrase. So there's no bots or things of that nature that are able to get it. Just people that were generally invested in what we're discussing and actually engaging. So if you have the POAP app open, you can pop open the Mint Plus button on the bottom right, hit the secret word, and the secret phrase today is, in my mind, an encapsulation of our guest. It is break the mold. All one word, break the mold for today's POAP for this event.
Wait, could I get it too, or is that corny?
No, you can absolutely.
I couldn't do it.
If you need it afterwards, just talk to me. I can possibly find a way to do that. But break the mold, all one word, no spaces, all lowercase.
Done.
All right. And so talk to me about async. I think this is super cool, especially with the variety of outputs that could happen. How did you engage with them? What were your thoughts when you saw this? I think I read somewhere that it helped you think of a new possibility for your music, being able to think about it in layers.
Yeah, this was one of the hardest projects that I've undertaken, I think, period. Just because I had to think about music differently. So I was really interested in async because of Blind Ear and my experience with writing loops and fitting loops together. So I thought, this is incredible. I really need to write this piece. And I thought a string quartet would be a great piece to write because you have the variety of timbres. You have the high violins, the low cello, the mid viola. So each kind of sonic spectrum is represented. So you could hear every layer individually. And so I thought, well, why don't we take it one step further? And how about I write a piece that exists as a string quartet, exists with all four players, but can also be a really convincing solo. So if somebody wanted to listen to it, it could just be the violin one line with everything else turned off, and it'll still sound good. Or it can be like viola and cello together, and that's it, and that'll still sound good. So I played around with having this feature that you can turn a layer off. And right now, violin one is off. That's violin one. That's that gray, like in the center. So right now it's a string trio because it has been a string trio because violin one is off. And thinking about this, like how can I make each line interesting by itself? How can each interesting line interact with the other lines so that it's just not chaotic? Like they need to make sense working together, but they also have to sound strong by themselves. That was hard. That was really difficult, coming up with the material that I thought sounded good alone and also worked together. And I assigned each instrument different roles. Like the cello is kind of the beat, like it keeps the bass, it keeps the groove, it keeps the momentum going. The viola has these little kind of subtle melodies that are fun to listen to by themselves, but they just like add texture to the whole quartet. Violin one is like the main melody, and violin two supports that main melody as well. So it took me, you know what, it actually didn't take me so long to write because I was really excited about it. I think I wrote it in like 10 days, but like 10 full days of composing, just because I was just like, oh my gosh, I need to get this done. This is the best opportunity. And I really thought of these four players as four individuals. And then the group was kind of just like the result of those four individuals playing their own parts. So it's cool to listen to all of the variations. The thing that I love about Async, this old version, if you scroll all the way down, you can hear all of the versions that have ever been minted. Yeah, and it keeps going. If you click on more recordings, like on the left side, yeah, it keeps going down to the first iteration of it. Oh, and then I also added electronics to it. So within those four individual stems, there are variations for each stem. So like there's an electronic variation for each one, and then electronic and acoustic mixed together. This was recorded all remotely, so it was a little bit tricky to get it all together and make it match up perfectly. It took a little bit of patience, but it worked. Now I'm really happy with the results. And the funny thing about it is there's even a version that I did for string orchestra. So like this has been performed by orchestras too. So it exists in so many different variations.
Yeah, I love async. I love the idea that, people that have the stems, you don't know when it could happen, but there could be some amazing mix. And by, grabbing a record and recording it, you could have a one of one or whatever. You never know, right? It's really something that appeals to you, and it's unique. And the collective itself is dynamic. It's a living, breathing piece of art that's always going to be changing, unless someone decides to take all of the stems and just stash it. I don't think anyone would do that.
Well, you know what? There's one blank album that was recorded. NorCal guy turned all of the stems off just for like a few seconds and minted a blank gold album. Somewhere stem was all gray, and then turned them back on so that no one else could have that.
It looks like he would have had to have some collaboration here with Basilius. So I guess they talked and organized that, those scoundrels.
I think Basilius has had it turned off for a while. So NorCal guy actually owns 3 of the stems. So he just went ahead and turned his 3 off to match Basilius's, and then turns the other ones on.
That's going to be a very scarce gray, total gray. I don't think I've seen that on many of the async snapshots. So that's very cool.
Silent. Yeah.
And so talk to me about some of your other drops. I know you have this latest one, Float, on Mint Songs here.
Yeah, I really loved writing this piece. Mint Songs asked if I was interested in this version 2 that they were coming out with. I had joined them back when they were in beta on Polygon, which is now their Mint Songs factory. And it was the only time that I released editions of my solo piano music. So I had something out as an edition. And I was really excited when they asked if I wanted to do this one of one. And so I composed this piece, Float. It's for solo piano, but I wanted to make it for felted piano. I just love the sound, the muted, like percussive quality of a felted piano. And I was lucky to find a sound engineer here in Nashville who actually works at a recording studio, which allows him to kind of felt the piano. You have to be careful with pianos because they're so tricky and so delicate. Like sometimes you're allowed to like put things in them, and other times people won't let you touch them. So he was able to, like, what you do is you put a piece of felt underneath the string, so the hammer hits the felt first, and it kind of creates this muted quality. So I really wanted that for Float, and I was able to record it in time for this V2 launch. Yeah, and I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Very cool. So you're, and obviously you've dropped other things as well. You had an entire album release essentially on catalog. You're, really covering the gamut and experimenting. So I'm eager to hear at the tail end of this, what's next and what's in store. But COVID happened. It affected a lot of musicians and a lot of live shows. Did that impact your creative process and help push you along the way for NFTs?
I think I would have been just as enthusiastic about NFTs if there weren't COVID. I was actually really busy with projects, like in real life projects during COVID, which is weird because everything had stopped. But the 2 big commissions that I had, they were still happening. One was for Austin Peay State University Wind Ensemble. It was the first time I'd ever written a wind ensemble piece. And the way that they did it is the musicians were all like super spaced out, and they rehearsed, I think, remotely. We had some remote sessions. And then I was also working on a ballet for Parsons Dance, and the whole entire piece was conceived on Zoom. Like the dancers were dancing on Zoom in their little boxes, and the choreographer was telling them the steps, and I was like writing the music. So I was kind of busy doing these remote projects during COVID, but I think it probably gave me a little more time to focus in on NFTs. But even if COVID weren't a thing, I would still be in the weeds, as you said. I would still be all in.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I'm often taking heat here for spending time in the office, and the assumption is that I'm working, but it's really I'm geeking on stuff that I enjoy, right? And I would be otherwise. I think, for musicians, fan interaction is a key component for market presence. How do you feel NFTs enhance this connectivity?
I think it's really cool. I love airdropping people things unexpectedly. Or I'll have like a little contest and I'll say, the first 5 people get the 5 o'clock waltz. That was my first Mint Songs edition. I don't know. I love being able to reward people for support. I haven't gotten into POAPs yet, creating them myself, but I really want to. And I think there's a level of connectedness that I never had before through NFTs that I really appreciate, especially coming from the classical music world, which tends to be it's a little cold, honestly. So having this ability to connect on social media and to just engage over NFTs, it's great. I really love it.
With the smart contract, there's obviously lots of opportunities that have interactive elements. Are there any cool features or uses for NFTs from musicians that you can envision or you'd like to experiment more with?
Well, for my one of ones, whoever collects those have a ticket to a concert whenever that piece is performed. And actually, I've gotten to meet one of my collectors and invite them to a show, and that was really cool. So there's that element of it. I would love to experiment with royalties, not in the streaming sense, but royalties for performances in concert music. As a composer, you have to register with a performing rights organization, with a PRO, and I'm registered with ASCAP. And so every time a piece of mine is performed, I'm supposed to get royalties for it. I'm published, I self-publish, so I get 100% of my royalties. 50% go to the composer, 50% to the publisher. It's kind of a clunky process. It takes about, well, royalties are distributed once a year for the composer and for the publisher, and it's like in March and April. And if you don't submit your performance in time, like you have to wait to the next year to get the royalties for that piece. So I've had royalties like pop up 3 years after a performance, 2 years after a performance. And it seems like this could be solved by blockchain technology, and it seems like it could be more efficient in a way. It would be really hard because there's so many moving parts, but I would love to see smart contracts help with royalties for PROs. I think that would be a fantastic thing.
That would be cool. Perhaps you have something in the works on that, given your track record of what you've been playing around with, and you might need to be tight-lipped about it. We will see in the near future. But you bring up an interesting question on, trying to drive value. The value proposition is something I find is a conversation, in music we're still continuing to have, right? Understanding NFTs as a musician, it's a little bit different in how you approach the market and who the target demo is for audio NFTs. Music's almost been commoditized, really, right, with streaming. And so, how do you feel that's playing out and evolving? Who is the target demo for audio NFTs?
That is a good question. It's hard for me to answer because I don't think a lot of people who listen to my music in the real world are necessarily in the Web3 world. So it's hard for me to know who exactly my audience is there. I always view music as art. Like, I think about creating music as an art. There's a lot of craft that goes into it. There's a lot of time. So I don't see it personally as that different from a visual artist. It takes me just as much time to create a piece of music as probably any visual artist, So for me, they're on par. For me, they're not different. It's not like this is a music NFT, so it requires this, and this is a visual NFT, so this requires this. To me, it's art. and it should be appreciated the same way. But like you said, because music has been so commoditized and almost disposable, I think it's hard for people to wrap their brain around music NFTs because they're used to it being just, kind of something in the background or something that they could always go back to without having to financially pay for it. So it's tricky. It's really tricky. I love this idea that anyone can listen to it, but only one can own it. It's the same for visual art, right? Anyone can appreciate it, but only one person can own it. So I'm a big proponent of one of ones. I think it just depends on what the music is and who you're trying to attract. But yeah, for me, the classical music audience isn't really here yet, so it's tricky. It's tricky for me to say who it is that is my audience, my collectors.
Right. And I'm just intrigued by everybody's answer because obviously, I think we'll continue to experiment and see, how things shake out. But it's definitely got its own path. And I think one of the biggest opportunities because of the experiential nature of music, of live performance, of people really wanting to value flag with artists that resonate with them audibly. I think there's a whole different experience that you get with music and performance art. And so I'm intrigued to see how it continues to develop. And I feel like you're someone that will probably be on the forefront of that. We do have a not similar, but a related question. You've experimented quite a bit in the space with some different things that you've done thus far. What platforms have you enjoyed working on the most? What improvements do you feel still need to be made to help more composers and musicians, maybe in particular classical musicians, get into the Web3 space and the blockchain?
I think for me, my favorite project has been Async, just because of what I created and how I created it. I think that if you're not deep in the space, there's a huge education gap. You need to know so much in order to be comfortable to kind of interact with contracts, with minting, and everything like this. I think that's the biggest gap. It's just education and knowledge. In the beginning, I was having trouble finding platforms that would allow me to upload what I needed to upload because there were data limits, but I don't think that exists anymore. I think that was just like an earlier problem to have, that if I wanted to release like a 5-minute video, I couldn't because I was only allowed like 200 megabytes or something. But I think that's been fixed. I'm not sure. But I try to educate people. I have like a guide that people could download specifically for classical musicians, or I mean any musician, but for classical musicians. So I think that the education is the most important thing, and making people feel comfortable, because with new technology, there's always a discomfort of, am I doing something wrong? Am I going to be hacked? There's so many possibilities, and you always hear about the worst case scenario, which is good because it puts people on their toes and on guard. But it's not as scary, I think, as people expect it to be. And if I could educate more people about it, if I could think of a different way or a more wide-reaching way to educate more people about it, I want to.
Someone DM'd me a question. If you could share, what have you found that's worked well for you and engaging with your audience and getting sales traction in the NFT space with music? And what have you found that has not worked so well for you?
I think the biggest thing for sales traction is honestly through Twitter. I mean, everything that I've gotten has been through Twitter, and not just like saying this is my piece, go buy it, but like telling a story about why I released this art, why is it special, what does it mean to me. What doesn't work is responding to people's threads like, I'm looking to buy whatever, drop me your links. It's just, most of the time it's just like engagement farming. But yeah, everything is just, I think, telling a story, creating a world, drawing people in, and just being really clear about what it is that you're doing and what you want to accomplish. Yeah, that's been the biggest driver of collectors to my work.
So I have a couple of community questions I'd like to run by you. I know we're up against the hour, but will not hear the end of it if I don't ask you. So, number one, any performances in the metaverse on deck?
That's something I really want to do. I'm dying to explore the metaverse more. No, not in the near future. I have a few projects I really need to complete before I can start to like focus on that, and it's something I'm dying to do. So soon, hopefully.
Okay, and here's an interesting one. What would be your guilty pleasure NFTs of interest? Things that you're interested in that you just think are fun or that people may not expect that you like to collect or that you just keep an eye on because it intrigues you?
Oh, Freeman. But do
Freeman?
that like with a hot wallet. That I mean, something totally separate. Yeah, have you seen these sites where it's just like crazy projects that are out for free that you can mint for free?
I've seen a few of them, yeah, to
Yeah.
to to put it lightly. So I do have your wallet up. I took a look at some interesting things in there. Um, I'll leave it at free mints, and you can share with us what you want. For the most part, collecting a lot of what I would say are classical music or fine art associated things with a couple of surprises in there for me. But an interesting question from the Peanut Gallery here in the community. What's next for you, Christina? I know you have a lot of innovative projects that you've done. You probably have some that you're working on right now. What can you share with us that we can look forward to?
I'm working on an async blueprints piece. So they released this new version of their music NFTs. And I'm working on something for that. I have a performance coming up for TEDx Nashville, and I think we're doing like a live NFT mint, pretty sure. So that'll be fun. It's at the end of August. But yeah, focusing on writing this piece for async blueprints and trying to balance that with like a new orchestral piece for a new ballet company. It's hard to find a balance between like in real life and Web3 projects. Um, yeah, so I'm trying to find that balance along the way.
Super dope. I'm going to link all of your socials on our Discord. We've put them in the Twitter as well. Everybody, please follow Christina. Obviously, someone blazing pathways and finding new ground for her genre in audio NFTs and just the audio NFT space in general. Christina, any parting words for the people tuning in on how they can keep in touch with you or what to look out for?
I mean, I'm always on Twitter, so keep in touch with me on Twitter for sure. I'm like always in spaces and there. I try with Discord, but Discord and I aren't friends. I'm trying. It's hard.
Yeah, Discord's another animal, but we appreciate you hopping in and spending some time with us. We're in the Discord. We're also beaming out to Twitter, Twitch, and our YouTube for wherever people wanted to tune in. Christina, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to take us out with Float so people can take a listen to this new piece on Mint Songs. Wish you the best of luck, and we will all be eagerly watching for your next endeavors in the Web3 space.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Take care.